The Arizona sun bled through a haze of red dust as noon settled over Red Hollow, a forgotten town on the edge of nothing. The stagecoach tracks had long since gone dry, and the wind carried only grit, gossip, and the faint creak of the Copper Spur Saloon's swinging doors. Inside, the piano was out of tune, the whiskey was thin, and the laughter was the kind that made honest men keep their heads down. The saloon's floor was warped, stained by decades of spilled liquor and blood. Men leaned against the bar, their spurs clicking now and then like restless clocks marking time until trouble. The kind of men who had no homes, but plenty of enemies. Above them, the ceiling fan turned lazy circles, stirring up old smoke and the faint scent of horse sweat and dust. That was when the stranger came. He filled the doorway like a shadow swallowing light. A tall figure, broad through the shoulders, the kind of man who didn't look like he was passing through so much as moving the earth under his boots. His hat was pulled low, his coat heavy with the trail's burden, and when he stepped forward, the floorboards groaned under the weight of him. Conversation dulled, the piano stopped mid-note. Even the barkeep, polishing a chipped glass, paused to look up. The man walked slowly to the bar. He didn't glance left or right. His movements were deliberate, calm, like he'd done this 100 times before. He set down a few coins, dusty, old, and said in a low, gravel-worn voice, "Whiskey. Clean glass if you got one." The barkeep nodded, poured him a drink, and slid it over. The man lifted the glass in one hand that looked like it could crush a brick. He drank without flinching. From a corner table, laughter broke out again, loud, slurred mean. "Look at the size of him," one cowhand barked. "Mountain man without a mountain." Another smacked the table. "Bet he sleeps standing up, like a horse." The stranger didn't react. He just placed the glass back on the counter, eyes fixed on the amber liquid left inside. Behind the bar, the barkeep leaned closer, voice low. "Don't pay him mind, friend. Folks here ain't used to seeing someone who ain't afraid of him." The man looked up. His eyes were pale, not blue, not gray. Just pale, like winter sky over a dead field. "Afraid's a word I left behind," he said quietly. The barkeep hesitated. "Name's Sam Keller. This here's Red Hollow. We don't get many travelers no more." "Eli," the man replied. "Eli Cade." Sam nodded slowly. "You riding through or settling in?" "Neither," Eli said. "Just needed quiet." Quiet didn't last long in Red Hollow. The saloon door slammed open, and with them came the sound of spurs, boots, and arrogance. 5 men walked in, dust trailing off their coats like smoke. They wore the faces of men who believed they owned the ground they walked on. At their center was a lean figure in a black duster, Cole Danner, the outlaw whose name folks whispered the way they'd whisper a curse. The room shifted like air before a storm. The piano man vanished. The laughter turned cautious. Danner grinned, flashing a gold tooth as he looked around. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Hope the whiskey's still bad, and the company worse." His men chuckled, taking up space where they didn't need to. Colt's gaze landed on Eli. "Well now," he said, "ain't this something? Who let the oxen?" Eli didn't turn. He drank, slow and even. One of the bandits, a wiry kid with scars on his knuckles, sneered. "Hey, giant, what's it like breathing that high up?" More laughter, the kind that prickles the skin. Sam wiped the counter nervously. "Colt," he said, careful. "He's just drinking. Let him be." Danner stepped closer, his boots tapping slow. "I'll decide who drinks and who don't, Sam. You forget who runs this town." Eli's reflection caught in the bar mirror, still silent, but the muscles in his jaw tightened just once. Colt leaned against the counter beside him. "You got manners, big fella. When someone talks to you, you talk back." Eli turned his head just slightly, enough for Colt to see the scar that cut from his cheek to the line of his beard. His voice was calm as still water. "Didn't hear a question worth answering." The men at the tables chuckled nervously. Colt's smile faltered for a moment before returning sharper. "You think you're funny?" "No," Eli said. "Just tired." That word, tired, hung heavy. The kind of tired that didn't mean from travel, but from years of seeing too much. Colt grinned again, trying to shake it off. Well, we can fix that. How about we get you dancing? He kicked Eli's stool out from under him. The big man didn't stumble. He stood, straight as a post, the top of his head near touching the lanterns. His coat shifted open, revealing a faded cavalry buckle and an old revolver, well kept but unpolished. Colt's men stepped back half an inch without meaning to. Sam swallowed hard. Colt don't. Colt spit a stream of tobacco into the sawdust. You best mind your bar, Sam. Eli's gaze dropped to the wet stain on the floor, then rose slowly to meet Colt's eyes. You done? The outlaw smiled. Not hardly. The room tensed. A match snapped somewhere, someone lighting a smoke, just to keep their hands busy. Eli turned back to the counter, picked up his hat, and set a few more coins down. Thanks for the drink. He started for the door. One of the gang laughed behind him. Big man's running off. Colt called out, voice low and mean. You ever killed a man slow, giant? Eli stopped in the doorway. His shadow stretched long across the floorboards. He didn't turn, didn't breathe for a second that felt too long. Then he said, no, but I've seen it done. And with that, he stepped out into the heat, letting the doors swing shut behind him. Inside, Colt Danner watched those doors move, the hinges creaking like they remembered old ghosts. He smirked and poured himself a drink. Giant thinks he's better than us. We'll see how tall he stands when the night comes. Outside, Eli Cade walked down the dusty street, the sun sinking behind the cliffs. He paused by the hitching post, hand resting on his horse's neck. His eyes lifted to the mountains far beyond Red Hollow, where the light turned gold over stone. Somewhere in those shadows lay the silence he'd been searching for, but Red Hollow wasn't done with him yet. Behind him, laughter erupted again in the copper spur, cruel, hollow, and doomed to end before another sunrise. The sun sank low over Red Hollow, bleeding red light through the dusty street until it looked like the whole town was burning from within. The Copper Spur Saloon stood in that dying glow, its windows throwing streaks of gold across the warped floorboards. Inside, the air was thicker than tobacco smoke, thicker with something meaner. Mary Hollis stood behind the bar, her hands trembling as she wiped down the counter. She was a young widow, her husband long dead from fever, and the saloon was all she had left. Her eyes flicked toward the door every few seconds, as though expecting salvation to walk through. Instead, it was Colt Danner and his men again. They came in like a sandstorm, boots stomping, spurs jingling, the smell of whiskey and sweat hanging off them. Colt's voice cut through the noise. Evening, boys. Looks like Red Hollow still belongs to us. His men laughed, scattering the few patrons who had dared to stay past sunset. Mary forced a smile. You want the usual, Colt? He leaned over the counter, his breath sour. You know what I want, Mary. Pour us the bottle and keep the glass. His hand lingered too long near hers before he grabbed the whiskey. In the corner, Eli Cade sat at a small table near the window. He'd told himself he was just stopping for a meal, but something about the way Mary's face went pale when Colt entered kept him there. His hat was low, his coat dusty, and his silence spoke louder than any man's words. One of the gang noticed him. Hey, look, the giant's back. Thought we scared you off, big fella. Eli didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the empty plate before him. Colt turned, grin spreading wide. Well, look who couldn't stay gone. The man made of mountains himself. He swaggered closer, his spurs scraping across the floor. Tell me, giant, you following me? Or are you just too dumb to know where you ain't wanted? Eli lifted his gaze slowly. I go where the road leads. Road leads to hell tonight, Colt said, laughing. And I hear they're looking for tall men first. The laughter rose again, rough, joyless, the kind that dared him to care. Eli's face didn't change. He reached for his coffee, took a sip, and set it down steady. Mary's voice broke the tension. Colt, leave him be. He's done nothing to you. Colt's grin vanished. Mary, darling, you don't tell me what to do in my saloon. It's my saloon, she said, her voice small but steady. He slammed his fist on the counter, making the bottles rattle. Not anymore, it ain't. You keep talking. I might just find myself a new barkeep. The sheriff was there too, Sheriff Briggs, slumped in the far corner, a badge dulled by fear. He pretended to study his drink, hoping no one noticed his silence. Colt's eyes flicked back to Eli. "Tell you what, Giant. Let's have a bit of fun. You look like you could wrestle a bull. How about you arm wrestle one of my boys? Winner drinks free. Loser crawls home." Eli didn't move. Colt gestured to one of his men, a thick-set brute named Mace, shoulders broad as a gate. "Mace here's feeling lucky." The gang shoved a table to the center of the room. Bottles clinked, chairs scraped, and someone began to whistle a tune that ended too quick. Eli sighed once, like a man tired of his own patience. He rose and stepped forward, boots thudding softly. The crowd leaned in. He sat, placed his hand on the table, palm open. Mace grinned and locked his grip with him. Colt dropped his hand like a starter's flag. "Go." The room fell silent but for the creak of the table and the heavy breathing of two men locked in struggle. Mace's arm bulged, his face turning red. Eli's expression didn't change. His hand didn't even tremble. Inch by inch, he pressed Mace's arm down until crack. The old table split clean in two. Mace hit the floor, gasping. The saloon froze. Eli stood, brushed the splinters from his sleeve, and turned away. The sound of a dropped coin rolled across the floor. Colt forced a laugh, too loud. "Well now, guess we found us a strong one." He looked around, his smile brittle. "But strength don't make you smart." Eli said nothing. He walked back to his seat, his steps calm as if nothing had happened. But his silence, it did something to the room. The laughter that followed felt thinner now, forced. Men shifted uneasily, glancing between Colt and the giant who had just broken wood like bone. Colt leaned closer to the sheriff's table. "You seeing this, Briggs? Big man thinks he's better than me." Briggs swallowed. "Just a traveler, Colt. Let him be." Colt turned sharp. "You forget who keeps you wearing that badge." Briggs looked down. "No, sir." Mary refilled a glass with trembling hands. Eli caught her eye for just a second. Something in her face reminded him of home, of kindness before the world went cruel. He looked away quickly. Then the piano started again, soft and nervous, but the sound couldn't wash away the weight in the air. Colt leaned against the bar, tapping his fingers. "You know, Giant," he said, "you got the hands of a killer. You ever use them that way?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Once." "Oh yeah. Who'd you kill?" Eli didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Colt's grin turned sharp. "What were you, some army man?" "Soldier boy. You got that look." The room blurred around Eli. For a heartbeat, the saloon vanished. He smelled gunpowder, heard the echo of cannon fire across the Tennessee hills. He was lying in mud, breath thick with smoke, the bodies of his brothers strewn in the trenches. A young private had screamed for help, voice cracking, and Eli had crawled through fire to drag him out. When the boy died in his arms, he stopped feeling anything at all. They called him the Ghost of Shiloh. A Union sharpshooter who never missed, never spoke, and never stayed to see what he'd done. The sound of Colt's voice dragged him back. "Well, ain't that something? Our gentle giant's got ghosts." Eli blinked hard, pushing the memory away. "Some ghosts don't rest." "Neither do I," Colt said, drawing his gun in one smooth motion. The barrel pointed at Eli's chest. The click of the hammer echoed through the room, like a warning. Mary gasped. "Colt." Eli didn't flinch. His hand stayed at his sides. He just looked at Colt with those pale, dead eyes, eyes that had seen too much to ever fear a gun again. Colt's finger rested on the trigger. "Say something, big man. Beg. Or pray." Eli's voice was calm. "You'll wish you'd let me leave." That was all. Colt hesitated, then laughed and lowered the gun. "You hear that, boys? The giant's threatening me. Ain't that sweet?" He holstered his weapon, slapped Eli's shoulder hard. "Go on then. Get out of here before I change my mind." Eli turned and walked toward the door. No one spoke. No one breathed. Outside, the sky was turning purple, the first stars cutting through the haze. He stepped into the cool air, the door creaking behind him. The night smelled of dust and gun oil. Inside, Colt poured himself another drink, though his hand wasn't as steady now. "Man like that," he muttered. "He don't scare easy." One of his men asked, You gonna let him go? Colt stared at the swinging doors, jaw tight. No one leaves Red Hollow without learning who runs it. Across the street, Sheriff Briggs stood in the shadows, his hat low, his heart heavy. He'd seen killers before, but never like that man. There was something in Eli Cade's silence that felt older than sin. Night fell hard over Red Hollow, the kind of night where the stars looked cold and far away, like they were watching from another world. The wind picked up from the east, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke before anyone saw the fire. By the time the alarm spread, the sky above the hills was already glowing red. Mary Hollis ran barefoot down the dirt road, her nightdress whipping in the wind. The flames ahead clawed at the sky, devouring the small ranch that had once belonged to her brother Tom. He'd built it with his own hands, fence post by fence post, hoping to raise cattle enough to keep them both alive. Now it was burning so hot the paint on the barn peeled in ribbons. She screamed his name until her throat broke. The Danner gang had left their mark behind. A noose hung from the gatepost, and swaying in it was what remained of Tom Hollis. His boots were gone, his hands bound. A crude sign was nailed above him, scrawled in black tar, "Tax paid." The fire roared, crackling over dry timber, throwing sparks into the night sky like cruel confetti. No one came to help. No bucket line, no shouting neighbors, just silence from the town that pretended it didn't see. Eli Cade stood on the ridge half a mile off, the wind tugging at his coat. He'd smelled the smoke before dawn and followed it, his horse moving slow through the mesquite. When he saw the glow, he knew what he'd find. He'd seen it before, too many times, in too many places. Men's cruelty was the one thing that never changed, only the names. By the time the fire burned to embers, Mary was on her knees in the ash. The wind carried her sobs across the plain, thin and breaking. Eli didn't go to her right away. He waited until the sky began to gray, until the desert light softened and the heat of grief had nowhere left to hide. Then he rode down. When she saw him, she didn't speak. She just stared, eyes hollow, face streaked with soot. Her hands trembled as she touched the scorched earth where her brother's body had been cut down. Eli dismounted, hat low. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Mary shook her head. "No one's sorry here. They're all afraid. Fear keeps people alive." "Then maybe they don't deserve to be," she whispered, her voice splintering. He looked out toward Red Hollow, where the faint outline of the copper spur stood against the morning haze. "Who did it?" he asked, though he already knew. "Colt Danner," she said. "He said Tom owed him for protection. My brother wouldn't pay." She drew a ragged breath. They laughed while they did it. Eli said nothing. The wind stirred the ash at their feet. When he rode back into town, the sun had barely cleared the cliffs. The street was quiet, too quiet. A stray dog nosed at a pile of trash near the well. From behind shuttered windows, eyes watched but didn't meet his. The Copper Spurs sign creaked in the wind. Sheriff Briggs was outside the jail, sitting on the porch with a coffee cup he wasn't drinking from. His badge caught the morning light like a lie. Eli reined in near him. "You hear what happened?" Briggs didn't look up. "I heard. And nothing. Ain't my job to chase ghosts. Danner owns this town. You know that." Eli's gaze hardened. "Not anymore." The sheriff's head lifted then, his eyes narrowing. "You don't want to do this, Cade. You don't know the kind of men you're dealing with." Eli dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. "I know exactly the kind." Briggs swallowed, his voice lowering. "You came here looking for peace. Don't trade it for their kind of hell." "Peace?" Eli's tone carried the faintest trace of a bitter laugh. "That ain't what's waiting for me, Sheriff." He turned and walked toward the blacksmith shop. The air inside was heavy with the smell of coal and iron. The blacksmith, an old man named Weller, looked up from the anvil, his hammer still mid-swing. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you left last night." Eli shook his head. "Not yet." Weller studied him a moment. "You look like a man who's decided something he can't take back." "Maybe." Weller nodded toward the rifle slung over Eli's shoulder. "That still shoots straight?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Straight enough." The old man sighed, setting the hammer down. "I heard about the Hollis place. Thomas good folk. They'll keep doing it, you know. Danner and his boys. Long as no one stops them. Then I guess they've run out of time. Weller's gaze flicked to the scar on Eli's cheek. You sure you're ready to carry that weight again? Folks talk, Kate. They say you used to hunt men for the government. That true? Eli's voice was low. Once. War's over. Not for some. The blacksmith stared at him for a long time, then nodded toward a battered rifle case leaning by the wall. Got a Springfield I tuned up last month. Shoots clean at 200 yards. You want it? Eli shook his head. I brought my own. He left Weller's shop and crossed to the small white church at the end of the street. The preacher, a wiry man with kind eyes, was sweeping the steps. When he saw Eli, he paused. You've got that look again, he said softly. What look's that? The one that comes before death. Eli leaned against the rail, watching the dust spin in the sunlight. How long you been here, Reverend? 8 years. Then you've buried more good men than you've saved. The preacher sighed. God saves who listens. The rest, he looked at Eli carefully. You're not here for prayer, are you? Eli's silence was answer enough. You told me once you'd laid down the rifle, that you'd had your fill of blood. I did, Eli said quietly. But some things wake what should have stayed asleep. The preacher nodded slowly. And when you're done, Eli's eyes lifted toward the mountains beyond town, already dark with storm clouds. Then I'll sleep again. When he stepped back into the street, the wind had shifted. The air was charged, heavy, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Mary stood outside the saloon now, her face streaked with tears, her brother's blood still under her fingernails. She looked up when Eli approached, her voice trembling. You can't win against them. Eli adjusted the strap on his rifle. Ain't about winning. Then what is it about? He met her eyes, calm, steady, and impossibly sad. About ending it. She wanted to argue, but something in him stopped her. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked down the road. Every step he took sounded like a drumbeat in the silence. The wind rose, kicking up spirals of dust that danced across the empty street. Thunder rolled far off in the distance, crawling closer with each breath. He reached his horse, opened the saddlebag, and drew out a long, wrapped bundle. Inside lay the weapon he hadn't touched in years, a custom Sharps rifle, dark walnut and iron, the barrel etched faintly with worn initials, Issy. It had been cleaned recently, though he couldn't recall when. His hands remembered before his mind did. He checked the sight, tested the lever, loaded a single round, then another. Each click echoed sharp and final. He swung the rifle over his shoulder and stood still for a long moment. The air smelled of ozone and dust, of something coming. From the edge of town, lightning flared across the horizon, lighting the mountains in brief, white fire. Sheriff Briggs watched from his porch, hat in his hands, whispering a prayer he didn't believe in anymore. Inside the Copper Spur, Colt Danner poured himself a drink, laughter rumbling from his throat, unaware that the storm outside wasn't just thunder. Midday light bled through the dusty windows of the Copper Spur Saloon, staining everything inside with a jaundiced gold. The piano played a crooked tune, half-hearted and false, drowned now and then by the hoarse laughter of Colt Danner's gang. They were louder today, drunk on their own fearlessness, swaggering like kings who believed the crown would never fall. Colt leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the table, a cigar pinched between his teeth. Ain't it something? He drawled. Whole town gone quiet after last night. Guess Red Hollow finally learned who runs it. The others cackled, raising their glasses, the sound scraping against the air like rusted nails. Poor Mary, one of them jeered, didn't even get to bury her brother proper. Maybe we should send her flowers, hell. Maybe I'll deliver her myself. The laughter turned mean. Mary was in the back, scrubbing the bar counter with shaking hands. Her eyes were red from crying, her knuckles white around the rag. The whiskey smell made her sick now, but she kept working, because if she stopped, she might scream. The saloon doors creaked once, slow and long, like the hinges themselves had grown afraid. The piano faltered, a note hanging unfinished. Every head turned. Eli Kate stood framed in the doorway, tall and still as a shadow carved from the sun. The light behind him made him look almost mythic, broad shoulders dusted with road grit, hat low over eyes that had forgotten how to smile. His rifle was slung across his back, his revolver resting easy at his side. Nobody spoke. The sound of the wind slipped through the open door, whispering across the floorboards. Colt smirked, tapping ash into an empty glass. Well, if it ain't the mountain himself. The giant come back for another round? Eli's voice was quiet, steady. No, I came for the last. Something inside the room broke then, the fragile, invisible line between mockery and fear. A single bead of sweat crawled down the neck of one of Danner's men. Fingers twitched near holsters. Colt rose slowly, his grin never touching his eyes. You think you're faster than me, big man? He gestured lazily to his gun. You think size wins gunfights? Eli took a step forward. I don't think, he said. I know. The moment stretched thin as glass. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills, the storm Eli had walked through now crawling closer to town. Then the first gun went off. The sound tore through the silence like a cannon. The bartender ducked, Mary screamed, glass shattered, and smoke bloomed across the room like dark wings. Eli moved like a man unburdened by time. His revolver cleared leather before most men could blink. The first shot hit the man nearest the piano square in the chest. He fell back, the tune ending in a discordant crash. The next two came for him together, one from the bar, one from the stairs. Eli turned sideways, fired once, then again. Two more bodies hit the ground before their boots even stopped sliding. Colt's men shouted, scattering for cover, overturning tables, kicking up dust and splinters. Eli walked forward through it all, calm, methodical, every shot measured. Each report echoed like thunder in the small room. Smoke hung thick, the smell of gunpowder mingling with whiskey and fear. Someone tried to flank him. Eli pivoted, fired blind over his shoulder, the bullet finding its mark. The man collapsed halfway through a curse. Colt shouted something, but the sound was lost in the chaos. He fired twice, hitting bottles behind Eli, sending shards raining down. Eli kept walking. There was a rhythm to it now, gunfire, reloading, breath, silence. Eli's movements were slow, deliberate, deadly precise. He'd been here before, on fields where bodies fell in rows, where noise and death became the same thing. The ghosts guided his aim now, whispering through the smoke. One by one, the laughter stopped. When the last of Colt's men fell, the room was still except for the hiss of spilled liquor and the soft ticking of a wall clock. Colt stood alone near the back, hands shaking as he reloaded. His hat had fallen off, sweat glistening on his temple. He looked at the corpses of his men, then at the giant who'd done it all without blinking. You ain't human, Colt hissed. Eli holstered his revolver. No, he said quietly. Just tired. Colt drew his last gun, screaming, and bolted for the side door. He didn't make it halfway. Eli's hand moved once, smooth as wind. The bullet caught Colt mid-step, spinning him backward into the wall. The impact knocked a breath from him. His body slid down to the floor, leaving a smear of red on the plaster. He tried to speak, but no words came. Eli stepped closer, looking down at the dying outlaw. Colt's eyes were wild, desperate. Why? He gasped. Eli stared for a moment. Because you laughed, he said simply. Outside, the storm broke. Rain hammered the saloon roof, washing dust and blood into the earth. Thunder rolled again, drowning out the last ragged sound Colt Danner ever made. Eli turned away. His gun was empty now, but his hands trembled only once before they went still again. The doors creaked open behind him. Sheriff Briggs stepped inside, hat dripping, eyes wide. He took in the scene, the bodies, the smoke, the man standing in the middle of it all like judgment itself. Dear God, he whispered. Eli looked at him, voice steady. God had nothing to do with this. Briggs took a step forward, hand hovering near his holster, though he didn't know why. You just killed half the county. Eli laid the revolver on the bar, the metal slick with rain. No, he said softly. Just the half that needed killing. Mary came out from behind the counter, tears streaking her face. She didn't look at the dead. She looked only at Eli, at the quiet, broken man who had done what no one else dared. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's over now. Eli nodded once. For you. Briggs opened his mouth, but no sound came. He wanted to speak, maybe to arrest him, maybe to thank him, but the words died in his throat. Eli walked past them both, out into the rain. The wind caught his coat, flinging it wide like the wings of some dark angel. He didn't look back. By dawn, Red Hollow was silent again. Smoke rose from chimneys, the scent of rain still heavy in the air. The town that had belonged to fear now belonged to quiet. Eli saddled his horse outside the old blacksmith shop. The horizon glowed pale orange, the world washed clean. Mary stood on the porch of her saloon, wrapped in a shawl, her hair damp. She watched him tighten the reins, her voice carrying soft through the morning air. "They'll talk about this," she said. He looked up, one hand on the saddle. "Let him. They'll call you a killer. Maybe. But maybe they'll remember who started it." She nodded slowly. "You could stay." Eli met her eyes, a faint, weary smile touching his face. "I ain't the staying kind." He mounted, the saddle leather creaking under his weight. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick and shining. As he turned his horse toward the open plains, Mary's voice trembled one last time. "The giant wasn't slow," she whispered. "He was patient." Eli tipped his hat in silent farewell and rode toward the horizon, the sun rising behind him. By noon, the story had already begun to spread. They'd call it the day none lived to laugh again.